Everyone hears spring flood emergency and thinks the same thing. Too much rain, too much snowmelt, too much water. But that is not what is happening at Cheboygan. Right now, the water at the Cheboygan lock and dam is rising toward the evacuation trigger, while the hydro station that could help move more of it out is still not running. By early Monday morning, the response had already escalated again. Overnight, a crane arrived at the dam and started removing gates. Every gate that comes out is one less obstruction between the water stacked up behind the structure and the river carrying it north toward Lake Huron. By 5:26 in the morning on April 13th, the Cheboygan County Sheriff's Office announced the dam had reached the ready stage. By 7 a.m., the level was reported at 13.75 inches below the top, and the pressure was already spreading beyond the dam itself. The US 23 bascule bridge over the Cheboygan River was raised and closed to traffic Monday morning, because if debris got caught beneath it and changed the flow, the bridge footings could begin to erode. Officials gave no timeline for reopening. The bridge had to be inspected first. So this was no longer just a high water report in northern Michigan. This was a dam moving toward its emergency thresholds, while critical parts of the system around it were being taken apart, opened up, or shut down in real time just to keep ahead of the water. From a distance, the headline still made it sound like a straightforward flood emergency. Record snowfall in March, rainfall running well above average, the governor declaring a state of emergency, sandbags, pumps, a dam under pressure from weather that had arrived from outside. That part is true, but the Cheboygan Lock and Dam Complex is not one structure in the way most people imagine a dam. It is really two connected systems sitting side by side. The Michigan DNR controls the lock, the gates, and the spillway, the public-facing structure people see when they think of the dam itself. Right next to it sits a privately owned hydroelectric powerhouse. And that powerhouse matters for one simple reason: it moves water. In a flood emergency, moving water is not some secondary detail. It is the whole game. If the water is rising behind the structure, then the only thing that really buys time is getting more of it through the system and out the other side. But at Cheboygan, the powerhouse had already been offline since 2023. A fire in an adjacent building set off legal disputes tied to the mill property. The powerhouse never returned to operation. So by the time this flood emergency arrived, the dam complex was already entering it without one of the key assets that should have been helping reduce pressure. And according to state officials, that missing capacity was not small. The complex was running about 30% below its rated outflow capacity. Because once you hear 30% below capacity, the problem stops sounding like weather alone and starts sounding like a system entering a flood with less room than it was supposed to have. On April 7th, the water was 21.5 inches below the top. By April 10th, it was down to 18 inches, and that was enough for the State Emergency Operations Center to activate and for the governor to declare a state of emergency. On Saturday, pumping briefly bought some breathing room. Then the level rose again. By Sunday, it was around 15 inches below the crest. By Monday morning, it had reached 13.75 inches, and that rise was happening while the upstream warning was still active through April 19th. That matters because the water behind Cheboygan does not come from nowhere. It is fed by a wider system that includes Mullet Lake, Burt Lake, the Sturgeon River, and the Crooked River. So the dam was not dealing with one isolated surge already in the reservoir. It was still being fed from behind by a larger landscape that had not finished draining. That is why the official thresholds start to feel very different once you understand what was missing from the system. The protocol itself is simple. At 12 inches, residents start packing. At 6 inches, they prepare to leave. At 1 inch, the evacuation order goes out. And on paper, that sounds clean, controlled, almost reassuring. But a protocol like that only means what people think it means if the system beneath it is operating the way the protocol assumes. At Cheboygan, it was not. Richard Hill from the DNR said all the gates on the DNR managed portion of the dam were fully open. Pumps were running. A crane was removing gates. Sandbags were in place. Crews were doing exactly what they could do with the equipment and authority they had. but the powerhouse beside them was still not operating. So when officials said they were putting through as much water as they could, that was true. But it was true inside a system that was already missing a major part of its flow capacity. Luke Trumbull, Michigan's dam safety chief, told Bridge, Michigan that the Cheboygan and Black River system was probably seeing something at or beyond the 500-year flood level. He also confirmed something even more uncomfortable. The dam could not pass the probable maximum flood, the federal design benchmark that FERC-licensed dams are supposed to be able to handle. That deficiency was already there. The offline powerhouse did not create it. What the offline powerhouse did was make an already existing problem worse. So now you had two different vulnerabilities pressing against the same structure at the same time. One was long-term and structural. The dam already could not pass the worst flood it was theoretically supposed to handle. The other was immediate and operational. The powerhouse that would have added outflow capacity was still down. Those are two separate problems. Together, they are a much bigger one. And the federal record makes this even harder to ignore. About 9 months before this flood, FERC had already ordered the owner of the powerhouse, Hom Paper 11 LLC, to take steps toward restoring it to operation. That was not casual guidance. It was a regulatory order from the federal agency overseeing the facility. The owner then asked for more time. The explanation was that the property was in the process of being sold to Hydro Mine Cheboygan LLC, a Wyoming-registered company. As of the emergency, the sale had still not closed. So the picture at the dam on April 14th is this. The DNR side is running at maximum effort, gates fully open, pumps operating, crane on site, while the powerhouse sat physically next to it, visible, silent, and still offline despite a federal order issued months earlier pushing toward restart. That is the part people do not see when they hear flood emergency. They picture weather. They do not see a split ownership system where the public side is doing everything it can, while the private side sits stalled inside disputes, extensions, and pending transactions. And Michigan has already seen what can happen when a dam runs out of margin while known capacity problems sit unresolved for too long. That is why Edenville matters here. Not because Cheboygan was failing in the same way or collapse was inevitable, but because Michigan already has a recent, painful example of what happens when federal warnings, inadequate hydraulic capacity, and rising water eventually collide. In May 2020, the Edenville Dam failed after heavy rainfall pushed the impoundment far beyond previous highs. The Sanford Dam downstream overtopped shortly afterward. Nearly 10,000 people were evacuated. Damages reached around $200 million. Later, the FERC independent forensic team described the disaster with a word that still hangs over every Michigan dam emergency: preventable. And the federal connection goes deeper than that. Back in 2018, FERC had revoked Boyce Hydro's license at Edenville because the dam could not pass the probable maximum flood. That same standard is now part of the Cheboygan story too. So the uncomfortable parallel is not that the two dams are identical. It is that, once again, a Michigan dam emergency is unfolding in the shadow of known capacity issues and federal regulatory history while the water keeps rising anyway. Bob Stuber of the Michigan Hydro Relicensing Coalition put it bluntly when he said this looked like the same pattern seen with Boyce Hydro: owners delaying ordered improvements, legal and financial complications dragging on, and the safety problem getting sharper while the paperwork keeps moving on its own timeline. That is what makes this kind of emergency so difficult to explain cleanly. But the most important missing lever in the system is still the one that is not moving. And while all of that is happening, downstream residents are being told to get ready. The city of Cheboygan has just under 5,000 people. The wider county has around 26,000. The downstream corridor between the dam and Lake Huron includes the residents who would receive an IPAWS emergency alert if the go order were issued. Same system used for tornado warnings. No soft version, no gradual wording. That is where this stops being an infrastructure story and becomes a life safety story. And the emergency protocol is still sitting there, waiting for the next threshold. Not just high water, not just snowmelt, not just another spring flood in Michigan, a dam moving toward its evacuation trigger, while the state-run side is operating at maximum effort, and the privately owned powerhouse that could add more outflow is still not running, despite a federal order issued 9 months earlier to move toward restart. The crane is at the dam, the powerhouse is still quiet, and the water is still climbing toward the line where the warning stops sounding procedural and starts sounding final. Subscribe. We cover more of these every week.